Strive and Thrive is a collection of discussions featuring guests from various fields, focused on guiding entrepreneurs in creating businesses that excel in every aspect: people, planet, and profit. Throughout the series, you can join us, Romesh and Mike, as we explore relevant topics with our guests which can help businesses thrive.
Romesh and I met while I was supporting a client transforming their business, and I needed finance director support and reached out to him and his team. Since then, we've become good friends who share a passion for business and entrepreneurship. If you like today's discussion, then you want to subscribe to our YouTube and Spotify channels. Hello everybody, and welcome to Strive and Thrive today. So today is a special version, something different. On today's show, you've just got Romesh and myself. And today we are celebrating, it was 5 years of Romesh and the FD Consulting. 5 years ago, he set the business up. He's now celebrating that time frame. So what we're going to take the opportunity to do today is spend time talking to Romesh, learn about his journey, learn about what he's learned personally, and share that knowledge with our audience. Romesh, welcome to the session.
Wow, hello. I'm in the spotlight.
Yeah, how does it feel?
Yeah, okay at the moment. I know you've got a few surprise questions in here, so let's see.
Yeah, I've asked a few people to give me some questions, and I've also saved some back, so let's see where it goes. So let's start from the beginning. So when you set up 5 years ago, where did you really think you'd be today? What was your kind of ambition, hopes, plans, things like that?
Wow, well, I think the honest answer is I didn't really know. I had been a finance director or chief financial officer for a number of quite successful startup businesses over quite a long period of time. And I felt that it was the right time to try something entrepreneurial. But it was a very different kind of journey for me. I'd been a kind of very much a standard career guy, I suppose. And so it took me a bit of time, firstly, to actually pluck up the courage to do it. And then, ultimately the initial goal was just to be a part-time / fractional FD consultant. I set up the business, called it the FD Consultant because I thought that sounded pretty self-explanatory. And that was the goal. Yeah, get clients, fill my time, and enjoy myself. Really, that was the plan. I wanted a bit of work-life balance as well. Those were immediate goals. But I really wanted to challenge myself in new areas too. So that was part of the thinking. I didn't kind of quite envisage how things might develop from that point.
And one of the questions I was thinking about as you said this is what have you found the difference between being an employed FD, where you'd have had as much responsibility as you're having now as a founder? What have you found as some of the biggest differences between those two roles as you stepped out into your own entrepreneurial journey?
Well, actually, I'd argue that it is quite different, and the responsibilities are quite different, actually, because ultimately, when you're a full-time employee, whether you're a director or not, you're still an employee. You are not, unless you're the CEO, managing director, the founder, you're not the final decision maker ultimately. Whereas if you set up your own business, you are. It might be with a co-founder perhaps, but yeah, ultimately you are the one and only decision maker. And that was a key difference. And listen, I've been in lots of boardrooms. All of them have given me fantastic experiences. But, I wanted to kind of follow my values, do things in the way that I enjoy doing things. And this was an opportunity to do that. So that was a key difference, I think.
And since you started, what's one of the things that you about running your business that's changed your perspective? What have you learned over the last 5 years that sort of changed your perspective of being a founder or an entrepreneur that, from when you set up in the first place?
I've got a real respect for founders and entrepreneurs and CEOs, managing directors, because, the buck stops with you, right? You are, as I said, the key and final decision maker. It's a lonely place being at the top in that sense. So I'd have to kind of point to the resilience. There's a lot of challenges with running a business, and you have to kind of learn to ride those challenges, embrace them, welcome them, and find ways of solving them. So I think it was a real of course, I've always appreciated what entrepreneurs and business leaders have, do and have done. Certainly when I was a finance director, but actually doing it myself has given me a new appreciation.
But resilience has come out a lot on our podcasts over the last year, hasn't it? It's one of those threads that comes out through pretty much most of the discussions on how you prepare entrepreneurs for the kind of roller coaster journey that you go on. You'll have a good day and then you'll get some bad news and you'll have to navigate that. I think it was you said to me, sometimes you've got to kind of, you often ignore the highs and you let the lows beat you up really badly. Have you found people to support you, and what have you done to sort of help you balance and navigate that journey?
Yeah, I think spot on. Roller coaster is exactly it. I think the key word when you set up a business is uncertainty, right? You don't control everything that you'd like to, to ensure your business is successful. So you've kind of just touched on the reliance of people, and I think that is really, really important. I'm a people person. I'm an extrovert. I like working in a team. So that was a new experience, setting up by myself. And I did that actually literally a month before COVID. So, from I suppose, confidence, resilience perspective, that was my first test. And, I think I've been given some good advice, which was take your time, don't, you're not going to earn loads of money from day one. It doesn't work like that. It'll take time, meet good people, get good advice from good people that you already know, find other people that you connect really well with and in a meaningful way, and learn from them. And maybe they'll be able to learn a little bit from you too, right? So it's kind of understanding that you've got a lot to offer as well, and really leaning in that and getting the self-confidence to back yourself in that way.
Yeah, interesting. And how do you how do you stay motivated and kind of focused on the things you really need to do? One of my personal experiences of being a founder is that you have to do some of the jobs you really don't want to do, but that's part of running your business. And there's things I like and there's things I don't like. How do you keep Romesh motivated? Because you've done well over the last 5 years. What's kind of been your support mechanism and personal motivation to keep moving?
Yeah, I think, well, firstly, do something that you enjoy doing, right? That's really, really important. I really love helping business leaders, senior management teams help their businesses improve, get better, and thrive. That's a real kick for me. I'm really passionate about it. So that's really important, and always remember the bigger picture, what you're doing. I quite like, one of the things I've really enjoyed about working in startup scale-ups and SMEs is actually the energy. So again, being that in that environment, being with really motivated people, it's just really, really kind of inspiring in many ways, and I like to contribute to that success.
And you talk a lot about looking for the right people, and then you mentioned startups, scale-ups, that kind of thing. Do you have a target audience you like working with most, or has it been the people side of it that's been the winner in terms of clients?
So when you're saying target audience, do you mean a type of business
Yeah,
versus
what's the
type
kind
of
of
person?
organizations that you and FD Consulting and Romesh like working with, and what are the types of clients you enjoy working with? What is it? Is it the business dynamic, or is it the sector, or are there certain patterns of trends that you like working with?
Yeah, so to give context to our listeners, I suppose, I've now grown the business. I've got a group of consultants who are also FDs and serve our clients. And they're fantastic people. And that's something that I was completely in control of, which was amazing. Sorry, Mike, I've gone off point slightly, but just to give context. Yeah, and I think that's been great for me because I've brought on board people that I really like, that I think have the right expertise, have the right blend of experience and the right relationship building skills, because I think we have a key opportunity to do that. So, gosh, going off on that tangent, I've actually now kind of forgotten what you originally asked me. So I'm going to ask you to remind me.
What are the types of organizations you like to work for? What's the dynamic that you're looking for in your clients? And is it the people? Because that's what you've talked about at the start of it, which is where I pivoted off it. Or is it sector or size? Or what are those that give you that work for you as your business, but also that you enjoy working with?
Yeah. So what myself and my consultants are looking for are businesses that have a bit of ambition, that want to improve and get better, that fall up in the startup, scale up, SME space. So if you project that in terms of people, it might be 5 members of staff to kind of 50, 100 members of staff, right? It could be 0 turnover to, say, our largest client today, 50 million turnover. So in quite a big space to play, if you like. And that's our kind of profile of a business. And we consider ourselves sector agnostic because we think a lot of the skills and expertise we bring are transferable between sectors. The people point you make is really, really critical as well, because I think there's a distinction: target type of business that we think is ideal for us, but then also there's the target type of management and leadership. And I think for things to work brilliantly, you need that balance there. And in terms of what I'm looking for, or what we're looking for as consultants with our clients, are leaders, management teams that genuinely do want to learn and improve. Because it's one thing saying that, it's another thing kind of doing it, right? So sometimes you'll have conversations with businesses and they're saying all the right things, but actually when you work with them in practice, they're not necessarily open to your advice and ideas and thoughts and guidance. And look, we're not sages. We can't, I don't pretend to say that we're can give omniscient, ever correct kind of guidance, but in the main, I think we're pretty experienced to what we do, and we back ourselves, and we don't necessarily expect our clients to kind of take on board everything we suggest, but we hope that our clients will be open-minded, progressive, and kind of consider deeply what we're talking about, because it's those clients I found that we can add the most value to.
Really interesting. And what's your view on the kind of fractional market? There's a lot of appetite at the moment for these fractional models. And I was thinking to myself, when you were talking. Do you see that trend growing, and do you see that why is that so valuable to the clients you're working with compared to sort of an employment model, which is what people would see traditionally?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Yeah, it is. It's definitely kind of the in thing right now. In fact, if probably in certain areas of fractional support, I don't know, for example, CMO, Chief Marketing Officer type fractional support, there's probably less supply of people in that area. I'd say certainly in the financial space, the market's quite busy with lots of people kind of looking for fractional roles. So there's a general trend towards fractional support, and different sectors of that fractional offering, I suppose, are different aspects of maturity in terms of the market. I think there's a tremendous opportunity here for businesses to kind of tap into expertise, experience at a low cost, basically. That's how I like to think we can add value, right? So I'm EY trained, FTSE 100 experience, got many years of startup, scale up, SME experience, and I believe that counts for something, and it means that I can make a difference to businesses that work with, even in a kind of light touch basis, depending on what they're looking for. So yeah, there's an opportunity for businesses to kind of take that into, especially when you look at what's happening, kind of in the wider space where, for example, with employment costs, they're rising because of increasing NI, etc. So yeah.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting trend going on around the consulting market versus the fractional market versus organizations trying to do it in-house, and I think that dynamic is changing at the moment, and organizations need to be able to adapt very quickly. And I
Yeah.
think these kind of fractional models work well in that context because you can bring external stimulus and decision making, but you also, to your point, got that ability to be more adaptable, to bring in more experience should you need it, or to quickly cut your costs if you need to. You're able to be much more agile. And I think, trying to grow a business from 5 to 50 to 100 is a really difficult curve as well. And I think that's where I see these kind of fractional models being really useful. I haven't worked with you previously. I kind of have experienced that benefit as well, getting the FD experience into the company I was working with. And that sort of enabled us to build a more robust processes, but not have to take on that full-time role that organization wasn't ready for at the time.
Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, I'd say that it's an opportunity for businesses at low cost and low risk to tap in to kind of expertise, experience, and not just the FD space, right? Across the board. And it's also good to have fresh pairs of eyes, right? Coming in and looking at your business, because when you're in the midst of it, when you're doing the work with your employees, with your team, you're right in the middle of things. And I think certainly, from my perspective and speaking to my consultants, they definitely say the same thing. You can come in, objectively assess each scenario, and you're not clouded by the baggage of the past, if that makes sense. You can kind of make clear distinctions, comparisons, and recommendations on that basis.
Very good. So go back to yourself and the world you've lived in and creating the FD consulting. What's your reflection after 5 years? What have you learned over the course of the last 5 years? And what's one piece of advice you'd go back and give yourself if you were to be able to speak to -5-year-old Romesh?
-5. Yeah, wow. Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much to learn, and that's part of what I've really enjoyed, actually. I really feel personally that I've developed myself in so many ways that I wasn't either comfortable with or knowledgeable about. And I love that. I really, really like the fact that I feel I'm a more rounded and experienced person having done this. So that's been incredible. And the learning's a constant learning, constant assessing of where you are, and adapting. You mentioned specifically the word agility, and being agile and trying to kind of keep up with what's happening and react accordingly. So yeah, I've loved it, and that's one thing I do see as a shared trait between founders, entrepreneurs, business leaders. It's that passion, it's that drive, that motivation, that fire. I think if you don't feel you have it, it's difficult in this kind of space, because there is a lot to navigate, and you need something to kind of keep you going, I guess. In terms of one learning, I mean, as I said, there are so many learnings that I could give examples of, but one probably, is to be open-minded. And really, I mentioned earlier that we're looking for open-minded clients, who can take and accept advice and challenge in the right way. And similarly, if you're setting up your own business, like, it's not going to be the same for, as it is on day one. In a year's time, it will be probably very, very different. And I think, Mike, you've probably seen this with your business. I know you have, right? Where the evolution is maybe something you hadn't quite anticipated, right? So for me, I had not anticipated that I would be able to develop my networking, my business development skills, my marketing skills, personally, and also in partnership with external support, to kind of build a brand, right? I didn't even think about that at the beginning, didn't think that was even possible. And yet here I am now. I've got, a number of consultants that I'm working with as a group, and I get a lot of joy from creating that community of great people sharing great expertise, solving problems, helping each other, obviously in a confidential, safe space, and all truly motivated by, giving a brilliant client experience and making a difference to their businesses, right? So the collective aspect I had simply not envisaged.
Interesting. And I know I've known you as being quite strong on the marketing front. Is that something you knew you'd have to do at day one, or is that something you've learned over the last 5 years? And, were you intending to set up a podcast like this with myself and sort of putting yourself out there as a thought leader in this space? What has that
Putting
evolved?
yourself out there. No, I mean, look, the best example I can give you of the journey I've been on is that one of my friends, actually, when I started the business, said to me, Romesh, you need to build a website. And I was like, okay. And you should put a picture of you on the first page, and kind of all over it, because the business is you. And remember, that was just me on my own at the beginning when I started, right? And I just gave that friend the blank no and said, absolutely not, mate. That's just not happening. No, yes, I have social media, and I'm okay posting the odd personal pic of me, in the way that everyone or lots of people do. That's fine, but I'm not really sure about kind of putting myself on a website professionally and being the main face of a business. But I realized that just wasn't going to work. If you want your business to succeed and you're leading that business, you've got to put yourself out there, right? And you've got people, you need people, your future customers, to firstly know that you're there, get to know you, and hopefully identify with your values and your beliefs, and appreciate the need for the service or product you're offering, right? So for me, it was like, gosh, I'm going to have to do it. And in fact, even if we pull back for a second, excuse me, I set up the company and I didn't really do anything for a couple of months. I was kind of taking a bit of time off, relaxing, which I had intended to do, and it was a great opportunity after I left my last full-time role to recharge the battery. So that was intentional. But then once I set up the company, I was expecting, right, okay, let's crack on. But then I didn't really do it. And I couldn't really identify why I was not getting on. And I actually went on a kind of personal development course, which is recommended to me by someone who is really helpful to me. And as part of that process, I realized that I had a massive fear of failure. I'd gone through everything, through life, I suppose, certainly academically, all good. I've been quite successful. In that sense, I've been pretty successful in my career. And here I was about to embark on something that was completely unknown. And I was a bit worried about that. And that was inherently what was stopping me. And I had to kind of, once I realized, and it sounds so obvious, right? But it was not something I had actually truly recognized at that point. And once I did, that enabled me to process it and kind of then overcome it. And so that kind of face on the website was then the first step. And then to your point now, kind of, a lot of my friends, can't stand the sight of me on LinkedIn, etc. But that's
I wasn't going to say anything.
it's you've got to embrace putting yourself out there, building your brand, because I think people relate to people, not businesses, particularly when you're doing what I'm kind of doing.
I think it's interesting for me. There's two things you've picked up on. I'm going to go for one first and then come back to the other. Is marketing wise, I'd say what I've learned, and it's come out really well on a couple of podcasts we've done with Stefan and Alex, is how build your authentic brand, build yourself. And I think when I started, and maybe that's the view you had as well, it's sort of a question here, is that you start and think marketing is like a thing others do, and it's very advertising and it's celebrities and you suddenly realize actually that's not really what it is. As Alex and Stefan really have talked about, just be yourself, be natural, tell your voice, tell your vision. That's what it's really about, and people will either engage with it or not. And I think for me, that fear of jumping over that hill into the advertising world wasn't really the reality of what we're talking about in terms of marketing and brand identity.
Absolutely. I think Steph and Alex both emphasized key points which I absolutely identified with. I mean, Steph talked about actually the fact that he had a realization that people actually really want to help you when you're networking, right? And that was absolutely true. People want to help you and get yourself in a position where you're helping other people, and it becomes, a really, self-fulfilling, really positive process, right? And something that Alex said, which is completely something I've experienced, but is be authentic, be yourself. And I think for me, the journey was just not in marketing. It was sales, right? I'm not a salesman, right? I'm a finance director. I'd probably say I am a salesman now. I have to embrace that, to an extent. But I've embraced being a salesman in a way that I'm comfortable with, that resonates with me, my values. I'm not ever going to be that kind of pushy salesman. I'm more about, hey, let's find about you and your business. let's see if there's a way we can help you, and hopefully we can take things from there. And yeah, trusting in yourself and leaning into who you are and your values, I think is really important. That certainly gave me and has given me gradually over time. And these things, Mike, they don't happen overnight, do they? And I'm sure you'll totally agree with that. We've found that with Strive and Thrive, right? I think we've between the two of us, we started and we were like, okay, episode number 1, let's not make it embarrassing. Let's kind of have a base level that we're comfortable to kind of build off. And, hopefully, we're making this an interesting podcast for entrepreneurs and people interested in business, and providing good advice. And I think, it's step by step, right?
I want to go back to your good advice, and the other point you raised earlier that I think is interesting is you mentioned the fact that you decided to do it, you took a leap of faith, and you went for it, and then you suddenly got, oh no, what do I do now? Kind of moment. And given this question gets asked a lot of our audience on Strive and Thrive, we get this question nearly every week or every time I talk to anybody about it: is I'm working for a big business. How do I do it? What do I do first? How do I do this? How do I be confident enough to go and embrace my idea? I've got an idea, but how do I go? How do I go? What would you suggest, having been through that experience yourself, for others who are listening?
Yeah, and I know you share this, so I'm going to get your views on this after mine, right? Because we have discussed this before. I think, look, there are key, in my humble opinion anyway, I think there are key things that you need to reconcile and be happy with before you jump into the space. And that is the uncertainty element. Are you going to be comfortable with it? Do you think you can adapt to it? The fact that it is a scenario that you need to have that adaptability in the first place and the resilience. And is it something that you think you'll get some real enjoyment out of as well? And I think if the answer to those kind of key questions are yes, then go for it, right? I think a lot of businesses kind of start with products which, again, in 6 months' time have changed with the market. You can particularly attribute that to the tech industry, right? Facebook now looks very different to the first iteration of Facebook, shall we say, right? And think about that with your offering, your service, your product, whatever it is. It will evolve. So, for me anyway, I think if you overthink it and you're trying to come up with a perfect solution before you've actually got out there, then you're just kind of holding yourself back. You need to just get going. But you need to have an understanding of those key points I mentioned earlier to make sure you've got a chance to thrive in this space. And what do you think, Mike? Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, and I think if you and I have ever had one argument, it's about the kind of the people, profit, sustainability question. And I think, but for me, for founders, you've got to decide on if you're ready to jump and you've all got an idea and you want to go. You've got to have a few basic pillars in place of understanding what can you sustain, how can you mitigate the risk. And that's sort of very practical. But actually, it's not about, and this was my mistake for years, is the vision and a clear plan and funding and people to work with and a team. And if you're waiting for all of the components to be in place before you make the jump, which is often the way people think like that in big businesses, because that's what they have to put in place for a project to move. Yeah. But when you're setting yourself up as a founder, that's very different. You only need a few of those pieces in place to be able to build a bit of momentum. And I think it's being open to the fact that that's your journey. And I think there's some things that people can naturally do. So you've got a natural, more technical skill set. So it's good. But you recognize the sales quite quickly was going to be your area of personal development. And I think For people who are more sales and marketing orientated, potentially it's the building the business that's going to be more of your challenges. And I think it's that kind of recognition of going, I'm going, this is what I'm good at, this is what I can do, but there's a whole world of stuff I've got to learn, but I don't have to have the answers before I start.
Yeah. I think to your point on vision, I think it is important to have a vision, but also to recognize that vision might change over time as you learn more and get more experience and knowledge, right? So that's the point of being flexible and agile. But I do think you want that North Star, right? You've got a direction that you're traveling, because if you don't have that, you could just be meandering, right?
Yeah, and I think
But
if,
yeah,
if you think about what Kim said to us about, she had a vision of what she wanted to do, and that became her purpose, and that was what motivated her, and the business and the product would evolve with that. And I think you're driven by values, aren't you? Your values are your vision a little bit, and I think that's what drives you in where you want to go and what you want to do. And I think, yeah, I think you're right, people, because you need that when you have a rainy day as well, because it will pull you through.
yeah, you do. You've got to, when things aren't working out as you hope they are, I think you firstly have to say, well, that's this moment in time, or it's this period in time that can change. What can I influence? What can I change? And, things can change for the better quite quickly. They can also change for the worse quite quickly, but you just have to ride that. I think, something that you mentioned earlier, the ups and downs, don't get too excited when it's going well. Don't get too down when it's not going so well. I think that's really, really important to appreciate and understand that you are kind of part of an evolving process as you grow your business, right? So yeah, I think that's
One of
key.
the other questions I wanted to ask you, and it links to what Kate talked to us a lot about on her podcast, is spending
Yeah.
time on your business versus being in your business. Do you think this is a nice mental model for a founder to have? How have you found that balance over the last 5 years, and how has that your time, as your time changed, how have you managed to navigate that between yourself? Is it something you see in what you've done with FD Consulting over the last 5 years?
Yeah, it has evolved, which you'd expect, right? Because I was an individual consultant originally, and now I've got a group of consultants, and we are there, supporting businesses, obviously individually as FDs, but kind of supporting as a collective under the brand. Um, so yeah, I think ultimately I was spending most of my time after the initial kind of trying to put myself out there, speaking to the network. I got busy quite quickly, actually, and therein lies the problem with being an individual consultant, and that is feast or famine, right? You can be too busy, and I know there's a knowing smile there, Mike. You've been there, haven't you? Yeah.
I'm going through it right now.
Yeah. 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 You can just get far too busy. You might have the same amount of clients, but the workload might change quite drastically. It can go up and it can go down. Whereas I actually realized I was, quite decent at getting on board new clients, speaking to people generally, and that was helpful. And actually, building our collective at the FT Consultant has helped me in two ways. It's helped reduce the burden on me in terms of consulting, and it's also provided me with a community, right? Peers that I can share my experiences with, and we all have. We've talked, and specifically with Steph, about the power of networking, and that goes across the board and in lots of wide circles, because you need to do that as a business owner. But if you're an individual consultant, it can be particularly lonely, and I really enjoy the fact that I've got some great people that I catch up with regularly. So yeah, share experiences and problems, and work out how we're going to get better at what we do.
Before I move on to what next, because I think that's where I'd like to take the remainder of the conversation, is what would be your takeaway from the last 5 years that you'd like people on this call to think about and learn and know from yourself, Romesh?
Well, I stay open-minded. I think, and we kind of touched on this earlier on in the conversation, right? But don't try and reinvent the wheel. Learn from good people who've either done it or are doing it. So that's the power of networking. Lean on and rely on people who are already in your network. There'll be lots of good people who can give you great advice. And also be open to bits of advice that you don't necessarily want to hear. Example, Romesh, you need to put a picture of yourself on your website. I didn't want to hear that, right? But the seed was planted, and I realized quite quickly, actually, yeah, I do need to do that. And thanks for that brilliant advice. It was good. And thanks for having the courage to say that to me, because you knew what my answer was going to be at that point. So
yeah, it's hearing some of the things you don't want to hear, and then you've got to reflect on them and go, what do I do with this piece of advice? Feels horrible.
Yeah. So being open-minded, and actually, I think you can get a slightly, until you have your own business, you can have a slightly warped view of the world when you're quite successful in a career. Just because you're good in your career doesn't mean that you're going to be, let's use the FD example, right? That people are going to come rushing to you as an FD when you set up your FD consulting business. It doesn't work like that, right? You've got to go and get the business. The business does not come to you. So it's being open-minded and being humble and accepting that. As I said, taking good advice and also taking on board new skills and self-awareness, right? Where are your weaknesses? Where are the areas you need to develop to make this project successful? And the more honest you are with yourself, I think the more ability you have to kind of correct and improve your shortcomings, because everyone has them, to build something effective.
Really good, really good. Now, what I'd like to do now, so we've had if you can see my questions are linked to what we've done over the last 10 months in terms of different podcasts. We've had a lot about being on and in the business and how to run it and marketing, but we've also had some interesting ones about what the future looks like and how to navigate that. So jumping onto a more forward-looking view, what's next for you in the next 5 years?
Well, what I've learned from the last 5 years is that it won't be quite as I envisaged. Yeah. I think the core objective is to maintain and build an excellent, and continue to build, I should say, an excellent collective group of finance directors with brilliant expertise, the motivation to do things to the gold-plated standard, the ability, identify people who can come on board, who can build great relationships with clients, build trust, and who are passionate about that goal. So that's the obvious vision, to kind of continue growing. How big? I don't know. I want it to, I quite like the fact that we are boutique, because, for me, it's about quality, right, rather than quantity. And I want to keep developing myself and push myself in other areas. I didn't envisage, probably as recently, as a year ago, that I would be co-hosting a regular podcast, as we've done. And we've really enjoyed it, right?
What's your vision for this?
Well,
I knew you wouldn't like that question.
But well, oh gosh. I think our aim from day one. All right, okay. Come on, you put out there. Let's do this. I think our vision from day one, I think, was just to make this, I think we're getting there. I think, we've got a long way to go, and we're continue to try and improve, right? So I'm just going to caveat that. But I want this to be a podcast, a video that entrepreneurs, business owners, founders, leadership kind of enjoy, find interesting, fun, and insightful, right? I for me, when I listen to podcasts, you don't absorb every bit of information, right? You just maybe take away a couple of key points and think, oh wow, that's really insightful. And I think I'd like to keep doing this and growing that, and everything else, I think, will fall out of the fact that hopefully we're building a really engaging, interesting podcast, which is something that a wide demographic of people might be interested in, right? So that's my first goal. With obviously the first goal is to find a better co-host, but
Oh, nice. Relegated.
I'm getting that dig in before you. I'm sure you've got to come back at me now, but no, mate. No, I honestly, Mike. Thanks. It's been brilliant. I've really, really enjoyed it. It's been fun, and I didn't really think or understand that it could be so interesting. But I would say, and you tell me if you. Oh, I know you agree, but we both have learned so much, right? From listening to
for
the
me,
experience of our guests.
the personal learning has been amazing. I've met some of your friends, you've met some of my friends, people we've both worked with in the past, and I've learned much more about running a business just by doing this whole exercise, and sharing it with others as part of these recordings is what has been probably the most emergent richness that I could have found. And yes, it spawned some interesting opportunities for me, and one day I'll come on to some of those. But it's actually been the value to me as a personal development
in itself, isn't it? There,
yeah, probably.
Yeah.
But at the moment, it's created lots of learning for me that has allowed me to think really about what I want to do with the business. And I've spent my time talking to people about things I probably wouldn't have done in truth because I'm busy. And this is my own personal learning development program, maybe. But I think there's so much more we can still learn and share with people. The more I scratch at this entrepreneurial world of founders, the more I realize there's still a lot for us to learn from each other. And people go on their own experiences, and you realize there's factors from the external world that mean they're successful or not. But there's also things that common practices that can really help people succeed. And that is sort of quite empowering, I think, in terms of how we can help people.
Yeah, I think you've touched on a couple of things I think I mentioned earlier, right? Don't reinvent stuff that's already been done. Build off it and make it work for you in your own unique way for your unique business. I think that's really important, and just keep growing, and let's be honest, we were both, it's been a journey for us, I think, in terms of being nervous doing this kind of thing, and we're getting slowly more comfortable with it as we go along. So that's almost a reflection of our business journeys as well, maybe.
Yeah, good. Okay, so what trends do you see? I'm going to ask you more thinking out there now for either your industry or just generally people who are looking to become founders. What do you see are the general trends and shifts that you're going to have to think about? I'm going to have to think about, our fellow listeners are going to have to think about in terms of things that are going to impact us in the future.
Yeah, this isn't going to be too insightful, really, because I think it's just obvious, isn't it? And that's technological change, AI agents, which is the next step as we evolve from large language models and all that kind of good stuff. I think so many businesses have a lot to do to keep up with technology, and then to kind of to identify where there are opportunities and then to harness it, right? And it's the pace of change and development it's increasing. It's changing almost weekly, isn't it? Right. I don't think that's an exaggeration, really. So I feel I'm learning something like almost wow factor about what technology can do almost on a weekly basis now. And That's difficult. It's difficult, isn't it, for us to keep up with it? But that's the challenge. And I think the businesses that will thrive going forwards are the ones that, just lean into that embrace and go, do you know what? Yeah, we've got to learn, understand what's going on, keep abreast of it, and then work out ways to make it work for us and our business.
Yeah, for me, that's almost the perfect piece of advice, right? Things are changing so fast. Don't jump, just keep experimenting, keep learning. And when you see something really good, take advantage of it and see how you can use it within your business. And I think I see businesses that are almost stuck and going, there's so much movement, I'm not going to do anything, or vice versa, new, and keep moving. And I think you've got to navigate those two worlds, especially when you're a micro business. You've got to go, where can I leverage this to become more efficient and help deliver the things I need to do, or game change my product? But I think in terms of you've got to kind of navigate those two worlds. You can't keep reinvesting in all these new ideas if they're not going to work. But at the same time, if you just stop and wait for someone to happen to you, it's probably too late.
100%. I mean, keeping learning and experimenting really echoes what we said about when you decide to set up your business in the first place.
Same thread.
It's not perfect from day one. You'll develop it, try things, and it will evolve, and learn from the things that don't work. That's the key thing.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for doing this today, Romesh. How's it been being interviewed yourself?
Yeah, actually, it was all right. Yeah, I thought you'd throw a few more curveballs at me, but you've been relatively kind, Michael.
Yeah, I decided to be professional when I got up
very
this morning.
Grateful for, so thank you.
Yeah, I'll save them for another day.
Indeed.
Good. So thank you very much for everyone listening to this show. Thank you to Romesh for giving him his honest views on the last 5 years. Hopefully you'll see a lot of threads that have come from a lot of things we've talked about that have been demonstrated through Romesh's experience of the last 5 years. And congratulations, Romesh, on getting to this point. It's a milestone in businesses. So good. Strive and Thrive is our regular series of discussions for entrepreneurs and business leaders. And we have lots of interesting guests to share their insights and stories with you over the next few months. Our next session will be in a few weeks, and we will be sharing information on social media about that. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd be super grateful if you could share it, like it, follow our groups. We're available on YouTube, Spotify channels, and only recently on Apple. Big thank you to Romesh today for coming on board and opening up and talking about his business, and for the rest of the team who sit behind the scenes pulling all this together. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for listening to Strive and Thrive.